I'd like to consider this kind of a train the trainer type of program, because what I'm hoping is that you will all take this and go to your respective non-ham preparedness folks in your communities and perhaps give this kind of program. Of course, the slideshow will be available on the RATPAC website, as they always are. So this has been something I've given to various CERT groups and other preparedness groups before. And I want to get as many people in my community familiar with using basic radios and some of the basic processes and rules as possible, so that they can help themselves. That's the whole idea of the CERT program, Community Emergency Response Team, is to help yourself and your neighbors when the official responders can't get there. All right, so CERT, as I mentioned, Community Emergency Response Team. And we told them, you know, they should all be concerned about communications, because what typically happens in a disaster? You know, when things are normal, the infrastructure works great. We've got, oops, why isn't the program advancing? Oh, there we go. Holy smoke. We have public systems that are quite robust. You know, they have very expensive equipment. They've got handhelds that you can hammer nails with, and they still work. They've got a lot of redundancy built into those things. Something is slowing up my slides tremendously. And yet, when you go to look at the write-ups on some of these disasters, you know, here's one from the 9/11 Commission. They said so many different fire department companies were attempting to use the same point-to-point channels that communication became unintelligible. And, you know, after Katrina, there was a lot written about how communication failures hampered the relief and rescue efforts. You had ice storms in Kentucky, and what did they do? It wrecked their communications. You know, their towers came down and so on. So, you know, why does communication always seem to be an issue during a major disaster? Well, generally two real causes. One is systems are still working, but they get overloaded. And the other is damage to the infrastructure that keeps those systems from working. Let's talk a little about each of those. Overload, we're just talking about being, you know, usage much more than the capacity. The demand exceeds the supply. And just like our highways, telephones cannot accommodate all their users at once. Even cellular systems, they can only handle, you know, a few percent of their subscribers at any one time. And even at that, they also feed into the public switch network, the landline network. And in an earthquake, for example, which we have out here, you could have handsets shaking off their rockers, and all of a sudden everybody's got a dial tone, and the system thinks they've got way more users than are intending to be used, and all of a sudden nobody can make a call anymore. Overload can affect public safety radios too. A lot of your agencies may use the trunking systems, which basically dynamically allocate a limited number of frequencies among who needs to use it right now. That means they don't have all the normal channels at their disposal if everybody needs to use them all at once. So these disasters create a surge in demand that far exceeds the capacity of any system, whether it's a phone system or a radio system, to accommodate those users. Infrastructure damage comes in a lot of different forms. The most obvious one is when commercial power is lost. In ice storms or fires or earthquakes, you can have transmission lines come down. Out here, when you have an earthquake, buildings can be damaged. You can have microwave antennas become misaligned, and all of a sudden that link with the master computer in a linked system doesn't work anymore. You have overpasses collapse, so your transportation gets cut off, buildings get damaged, and lifelines such as water communication, transportation, fiber optic, everything can get severed. If you ever want to see how bad things can get, take a look at the Great Shakeout scenario, which was done by Caltech and USGS and a whole bunch of other people who developed the what's now become a regular annual event. They had a whole scenario showing what lines, at least in Southern California, would be damaged and how badly. You were looking at like displacements of fiber optic lines by meters, which means you can't just go and reconnect them again. So the bottom line that we want to get out to our community members is that the infrastructure that seems so reliable may not be there. So you have to do something to prepare for communications in a disaster. First thing, obviously, is to prepare your family, have a plan, have your supplies and escape routes, practice those things. Everybody should have an out-of-state contact. The reason is that we've experienced this in Southern California with some of the earthquakes. You may not be able to phone locally, but you can phone often out of state. And so if you have a relative or someone who can be the point of contact, once you reach them and let them know you're okay or you're evacuating, then other people interested in your welfare can contact them and get the word out that way. The other thing that we can encourage our folks to do is to learn to use FRS radios, or if you have the family license, GMRS radios. FRS is the family radio service. GMRS is general mobile radio service. The first is an unlicensed service. The second is a licensed service, and we're going to talk about each of those. In addition to preparing your family, you want to prepare your neighborhood. This is where the CERT program comes in very heavily, the neighborhood watch programs, basically where neighbors get together, they determine what resources they have among them and how they might organize if and when the first responders, the official first responders, can't get there. You basically become your own first responders. We encourage them to not only learn to use FRS radios, but also plan to use them. How are you going to use them? Practice using them. We conduct, at meetings, we conduct training, and then we'll have people go out into the parking lot looking for pre-installed little signs and triggers that they report back in, and we have them practice the radio back and forth and the protocols and so on. And of course, we encourage them to find local amateur radio operators who can help them. So FRS and GMRS are both low-cost, short-range UHF transceivers. They're up above the 70-centimeter band that we have. And by the way, I found that like a good 70-centimeter gain vertical will actually work pretty decently on those frequencies. Now, FRS is very low power. There is no license needed, and these are ubiquitous. They sell them in bubble packs at the sporting goods stores and the big box stores and so on. GMRS is more power. It can be more power. And unlike the FRS, you can use external antennas up to a certain height. It does require a license, but just when our amateur fees went up in April to $35, the GMRS fees, license fees, came down from 70-something to $35. And that, like our license, is good for 10 years. Unlike our license, it's valid not only for the licensee, but his or her entire immediate family. So you could have several radios all under that one license. That's a pretty good deal. There are 22 channels in the system, simplex channels. 15 of those are common among FRS and GMRS. The first 7 have power limits on them, like 5 watts if you're GMRS, 2 watts if you're FRS. The next 7 are FRS only, and they are low power, half a watt, handheld only, no mobile radios. And then the last 8 are both FRS and GMRS, but here the GMRS radios can use the full, I think it's up to 50 watts that you're allocated. So between having a lot of power and a good outside antenna, a GMRS station can become a great anchor point for those little FRS radios that people in your neighborhood have. That could be the hub, and they're very effective. I'm in the northwest corner of the San Fernando Valley, which has about 4 million people in it, and I'm able to talk all over the valley with other GMRS users, pretty much all of whom happen to be hams. But we have a net every Sunday. After our 2-meter net, we have an FRS GMRS net, and encourage the community members with handheld radios to get out and try. And one or more of us can usually copy them and relay them in to net control. So the FRS, as I mentioned, low power, 0.5 to 2 watts, non-removable, non-upgradable antennas. That's one of the conditions. You can't put a big antenna on an FRS radio. They really work pretty well for talking over a few blocks, and there's no fee or exam or license or anything else. When it gets crowded, of course, those 22 channels may not be enough. I've taken these to places like Disneyland, and you try and talk to one of your family members in another part of Disneyland, and that thing is going all the time. You're going to get interfered with all the time. So the fact that they don't have broad geographic coverage is probably a good thing, because there are tens of thousands of these probably in the major metropolitan areas. So the fact that they have coverage of a few blocks is good. These are inexpensive. I've seen them starting around $10 each, or kits up like $30 or so, which include a charger and a little cheap headset and so on. Manufacturers include Midland, Uniden, Motorola, Cobra, and others. They're typically sold in sets of 2 or more, and some of them may have a few additional features like the NOA weather broadcast, like we can hear, up above our 2-meter band. They may look something like these. Here are some typical from Midland, Motorola, and Uniden, but they could look like this. So, but they all work. So one of the things you want to encourage your community members to do is develop some basic operating skills to get the most out of those radios. And this is where you, as ham operators, can do a great job, because these are the kinds of things you're used to doing. You've built those skills already, and you can help them build those skills as well. First, copying accurately what you hear on the radio. Second, speaking concisely and distinctly. Third, following good radio procedures. And you can teach that, and then you can drill it. As far as building their copying skills, encourage them, if they have a radio that hears ATC and air traffic control on the local airport, listen to that, kind of keep a log of what's going on. If you have fire or unencrypted police tactical frequencies, listen to those. In Los Angeles, all the fire frequencies are unencrypted, and you can try and keep a log of those. Learn the ICAO phonetic alphabet. That's something we all use, but it's something that can make communications in a difficult situation much clearer. When my wife got her license about 12 years ago, she started using the phonetic alphabet to spell license plates, road signs, and so on while she was driving, and got very used to it. Currently, she's a national traffic system message handler and net control, so it definitely took. Teaching them good radio procedures. Now, these are the real basics. First, you start with who are you calling, and then who are you. Wait for acknowledgement before starting a message. This is something that I still hear folks on net, hams on net, sometimes not do. They'll call somebody and just start talking without even knowing if they're at the radio, if they're ready to copy. So get that back and forth. It's just like the handshakes that go on when you're sending digital traffic. You need that same handshake function with voice messaging. Make sure you clear the frequency when you're finished, so that somebody else knows that they can go ahead and use it and that your communication is done. Now, these are real basics, and again, you may be used to it, but folks who aren't used to using a radio are not used to it, and they need that training and they need that reinforcement. Encourage them to use short, simple messages. Fewer words are less likely to get messed up than longer words, longer messages. If they're going to give numbers such as street addresses, make sure they say each digit separately. 5514, not 5514. All sorts of things can get messed up if you start giving numbers in other than single digits. Decide on tactical call signs and assign them in your CERT team. Now, hams are not necessarily used to using tactical call signs unless you are a regular in the emergency communication area. But basically, a tactical call is just a radio identifier, and it's assigned not to a person, but to a location or a function or a team for some incident or drill or an ongoing operation. Tactical call signs are good because first, they help operating units of different functions use the same communication channel. And importantly, they don't change when the people assigned to a given task change. You know, if you have something that's ongoing for a couple of days, you're not going to have the same operator at XYZ hospital. And if you change operators, it's more important for net control to be able to reach that hospital than to be calling the operator he thought was on duty there. To be effective, all parties have to know which call signs are being used by which operating units. You have to work it out ahead of time. People have to write it down and you know which channels and frequencies they're going to be using. I was operating as part of a statewide medical exercise at the UCLA Medical Center one year with another ham. And the operations center was buried down in a bowels of one of the medical buildings. And we couldn't really reach the folks we had to reach across town from down there. So I set up on the roof and they gave me one of their commercial UHF handhelds. So I was able to talk to them at the hospital folks inside. And then I was on the roof and then I could relay that using the things I had set up on the roof there across town. And I heard terrible mix-ups because people had no clue how to use the radios. Their command post, I heard given at least 6 different names by different people, command, net control, this and that, and there was no consistency. I heard people getting on the radio saying, "Mary, can you hear me?" And this is a multi-thousand person medical center. So if you have a chance to work with an institution where they're using commercial radios, the same kind of thing applies. You can teach them good radio protocol, particularly for those people who aren't used to using radios, you know, the doctors, the nurses, and so on. And you can make them much more effective with those radios that they already have. The tactical call signs, they should be distinctive enough that everybody knows who you're talking to. Elm Street Medical is different from Elm Street Search, from Elm Street Fire, from Elm Street Command, which is different from Main Street Medical, which may be a couple of blocks away. So we use tactical call signs, Elm Street Command, this is Elm Street Fire, and then you use that throughout the exchange. And at the end of your transmission, and when you're all done, you clear the frequency, again, so everybody knows it's available. Elm Street Fire clear. Now this is assuming you're using either a commercial radio or a FRS or GMRS radio. Of course, if you're using amateur radio, that's a different matter because you also have your SCC call sign to meet the Part 97 ID requirements. And so when we teach this to hams, we teach them to, after they clear with a tactical, the last thing they do is get their amateur call at the end of the series of transmissions so that everybody else knows the frequency is clear and they've met their ID requirements. Prepare those radios for regular use. Many of them come with rechargeable batteries, but the quality of some of those rechargeable batteries is questionable. I just, for some wilderness camping we did a couple of weeks ago, I got a batch of FRS radios, new handhelds, and they all came with the rechargeables. But before we went out there, I put the rechargeables on the charger. I got them all charged up, and then I sat one on receive to see how long it would last, just receiving, and it was not more than a day. So I said, well, this isn't going to do because I don't have any electricity out there in the wilderness. So I replaced all those rechargeable packs with AAA batteries, and they lasted the entire trip. So that worked out quite well. But everybody should have those, and don't store the batteries inside the radios, preferably store them with the radios but where you can install them quickly if necessary. Because as we know, if you have the batteries inside the radio, the Murphy's Law says that they're going to start leaking and destroy the inside of the radio. We encourage users to turn off any unneeded features. Typical among those are those so-called privacy tones. And I usually go through a little discussion about what those tones really are, what they really do. They just basically keep you from hearing what's going on the frequency, except when somebody sends the tone. And also that beep at the end of the Roger beep, some people call it, at the end of a transmission is kind of useless too. So we try to get them to turn those things off and then get them all configured. And by the way, if you're going to get a group such as a neighborhood or a business emergency team or a neighborhood group, whatever it is, if they're going to get radios, I encourage them to get all the same model. That way everybody knows how it works, and if one person forgets how to turn something on or off, somebody else can help them. The important thing is, once they get them, don't leave them in a drawer and forget them, because that's the surest way that they won't be ready when you need them. I know hams who've done this with their handhelds. They only got in for emergency communication, and then when the time comes, they pull the radio out and the battery's dead and they don't know what frequency to go to and so on. They're absolutely unprepared. And that's probably, frankly, a good thing, because an unprepared, unknowledgeable ham on a busy channel can really screw things up. Leave it to the people who've actually practiced and tried this stuff. So you don't want to be one of those, and you want to make sure the folks you're coaching aren't one of those. When you're showing them how to use the radio, make sure they know to hold the thing a couple of inches away, preferably angled slightly away from your mouth so you don't get too much sibilance. The push to talk button, usually on the left side, but there's a flip side to that. Some of them don't know you don't just keep hanging onto the button. You have to let go to listen. So it's not just a PTT button, it's an LGL button. Let go to listen. And make sure that ask others whether your voice is too loud or too soft. We have on our 2-meter nets, we have people I have to crank the volume up to hear them. And then the one with the booming voice comes on, I have to crank it down before my eardrums burst. So people should get to know how they can best be heard when they're using the radio. Same thing with the environment you're in. Some environments are noisier than others. So they should know how to find a spot where not only they're not going to be interfered with. You know, it's hard if they're talking and there's this huge air conditioner going in the background or machinery. People won't hear them, and they won't be able to hear the radio very well without turning it up. At which point, the little speaker in there probably distorts. So, teach them these things, and you give them some examples. We would encourage a group, once they have the radios, run some coverage tests. Not every place on a block or in a development it has the same radio qualities. Some of them may be dead spots, some may be hot spots. You should really work that out ahead of time when you know that there isn't life or limb at stake. You can develop kind of a map of where the good spots are. Among other things, people will learn perhaps that, hey, if I'm inside my house, I can only talk a few houses away, but if I step out into the backyard or get up onto the patio, I can talk to everybody on the block. That's the sort of thing they should know and practice. If you can get them to start a FRS net, that's a great thing for them to practice. The one I mentioned earlier in the presentation, Lake Balboa Sunday morning simplex net, we have at 10 o'clock every morning on channel 17. We promote that among the community groups. We have it on the council's website, and we get people to check in regularly, and at least they know the radio works. They know who they can hear and who can hear them. So try and make that a regular thing. The more they use them, the more comfortable they'll be when they need to. And if there isn't a net, you should start one and conduct it and get them practicing. After this, and especially if you're giving them a little bit of practice, encourage them to team up with their local hams. And obviously, you're one, so they know one person, but they should find out who else is out there. They should understand that hams have a lot more frequencies and bands we can use. We have a lot more tools in our toolkit. We can contact places that they can't. We typically have training in disaster communications, or we can get that training, and I would encourage you all to get that. And of course, we serve at no cost to the public. So you can be a mentor, you can be a coach, and you can even be a critical junction point in a real disaster in your neighborhood if necessary. You're the comms person. And if you are a ham, first thing, connect with your neighbors. You know, hams often have complained that they have trouble because a neighbor hates their antenna or this and that. And of course, if you're in a homeowners association, often there are rules that preclude you, because of the private deed restrictions, from putting up anything effective, in a few cases even getting on the air. But I know some HOA areas and community developments where there are lots of restrictions, but by forming a disaster preparedness committee or joining one and starting to get the subject around the communications, all of a sudden they realized that if they had this ham there and they were able to use their equipment and their antennas, the neighborhood would be a lot better off. They would have contacts outside and be able to get help that they can't necessarily get on their own. So you do a good soft sell, take a little time. And I know some HOAs where they have actually taken a clubhouse and put up an antenna and dedicated a radio room for the hams. So far from barring them, they make it easy for them to get on the air because they know there's a benefit to the community because you've sold them on it. Make sure also that you've joined some existing emergency communication network. That could be ARES, RACES, ACS, your local club, anybody where they do regular exercises, they follow good procedures, and they have some connection, hopefully, with the official first responders, whether it's fire or police or sheriff. And in doing that, you'll become much more valuable to your neighborhood and to all those folks you taught to use those FRS and GMRS radios. You should have flexibility yourself as to what bands you can use, what modes you can use, different power sources, different antennas. You should be able to operate from home, from a parking lot, or from a grocery store parking lot, from your car. The more ways you can get on the air, the more reliable a resource you're going to be for your community. Be sure you're field ready, operating away from home, and that includes having the necessary pre-programmed radio channels, resource references, and so on. Know how to reach other hams who may be attached to first responders, even if you and your immediate group are not. Learn message handling. That can come in very handy, especially in a health and welfare situation, because health and welfare traffic is one of the things that tends to tie up public networks. And the more you know about handling that properly, by maybe getting involved in the national traffic system, your local traffic nets, or Radio Relay International, and so on, you will get good at handling messages, and you'll get efficient at it. And when all of a sudden the volume goes up and you're very busy, you're not sitting there trying to figure out how to do it. You're cool, you're collected. This is a normal thing for you. So that's a great set of skills, and you don't have to be really technical to do that. All you have to do is understand the protocols and get used to using them properly. My wife is not at all technical, but she's been in the NTS system for probably 9 of her 11 years, and she can run a national traffic system net, moving messages between people and groups, and as well as taking messages, delivering them. And by the way, delivering those NTS messages, especially the Welcome to Ham radio ones, great chance to build some new operators and get them hooked up with their local club or their local EmComm group. There are all sorts of benefits to that. And then finally, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I would encourage you to take this class or something similar to it. Teach it in your local community. Reach out to the CERT teams, reach out to the preparedness groups, ask your local fire department, police department, what sort of groups are out there, community groups that are helping in a disaster that you may not know about. Get introduced to them and go into their meetings, find out what they're about. And if you yourself can take some of the training that they go through, such as, some of the first aid and emergency response classes, shelter operations, and so on, you'll understand better what mission they're trying to accomplish, and therefore you can help them design a communication system that's appropriate to that. So with that, I will end the sharing, and you can watch my lips move like an Italian Western. That the timing is off, and let's see if we have some questions.
Okay.
I don't hear any questions.
Do we have any questions in chat?
A GMRS license covers an immediate family, or can it cover a group?
It covers an immediate family, so parents, children, stepchildren, grandchildren, grandparents, and so on.
Okay, so there's no group
Now,
license.
if you ask how rigorously the FCC is going to enforce that, good luck.
Okay. John wants to know about why Mures is left out of this.
I haven't used Mures. In fact, we're going to be having a presentation on it, I believe, sometime in the future here, but I've never used it. My understanding is it's limited power, and it's also mixed, I believe, with commercial users, so that may make it less usable in a like an urban environment.
Okay. Doug out of Utah wants to know, how do you keep FRS GMRS operators from being bored on a weekly check-in, check-out net and bailing? Probably the same way you should do it with hams.
Yeah, probably so. I mean, again, design some exercises once in a while. Maybe instead of the regular net, you're going to have them report some particular piece of information and see how many people can get it. Most of them, they check in, they're not writing anything down. Maybe you can encourage them to take one day, 1 week a month, and instead of just checking in and putting their radio on the desk, have them write down all the call signs, the names and the locations that they can hear. Get them used to using them other than just to check in.
Okay. And Lloyd posted a list of the nationwide GMRS repeaters. If anyone is looking for that, it's in the chat, so you can find out whether there are repeaters in your local area. And if there are GMRS repeaters, link from Zello.
Right. There are repeaters, and my understanding is there's no actual coordination process for those. So it's just kind of among the folks who have the resources to put them up and have access to topographically advantaged locations to put those up.
If you are going to teach people to use a repeater, you really need to train them. Down here, we've had a couple of GMRS repeater owners take their machines off of the air because the undisciplined nature of the transmissions, and the people just wouldn't listen. So the guy said, if you don't straighten out, I'm going to turn the repeater off. And they did, and it got the HOAs that these guys were in very upset. How dare you turn off our frequency? He said, it's not your frequency, it's my frequency.
It's my hardware, it's everybody's frequency.
Yeah, everybody's frequency.
Right, yes, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I would say, just like, I mean, you all know that there are certain 2-meter channels that you don't want your kids listening to also. There are always wackos on radios, so you can't prevent that. But one possibility would be if there's an issue on a repeater, the repeater owner can selectively turn it off, and I believe they may be able to send a complaint to the FCC if they have somebody who is repeatedly abusing it. And I know that even despite the level of enforcement that there has been in the past, FCC has taken action against hams who continually abuse particular repeaters after being told to stay off. And they might do the same for GMRS if it got that drastic. Okay. Anything else?
No, we got a hand. Victor, I need to lower your hand. I'm sorry. Anybody else? David, W0DHG, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure, Marty, you were there for the year at Baker to Vegas, but we actually used MERS for the public address system because it's open and free, and all you need to have is radios that'll support it. Our PA system that we use to announce runners, we had a backdoor channel from a radio that I carried around on my belt, and there was another operator that had it on their belt. And if there was a big emergency and we needed to get on the PA system when we weren't near one of the microphones, we used MERS to get into that system. So.
Oh,
anyhow.
okay. Sounds like a good idea.
Nice
All
to
right,
see
good.
you
Well,
tonight,
thank you.
Marty.
Sounds like that's something we should add to the presentation. I will do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're at a closing of this. It's been a great presentation. Marty has showed us a good example how you overcome obstacles to make things happen.
If you plan A, B, and plan C.
Yes.
Everybody, have a good weekend.